I spent 32 years hoping my wife would never text me. Not because we didn't love each other, because if she ever sent one particular message, I knew my life would never be the same again. We'd made that promise when we were young. We prayed we'd never have to keep it. Then, in the middle of my daughter's toast at my retirement party, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. 3 words, "Bring the umbrella." I almost missed it. My daughter had just stood up at the head table, tapping, her glass with a fork, waiting for the room to quiet down. "Before Dad opens his gifts," she said, "I want to say something about the man who taught me that doing the right thing quietly is still doing the right thing." 40 people turned toward me, glasses raised. My grandson tugged my sleeve, holding the cake knife like a trophy. "You promised you'd cut it with me, Grandpa." I smiled at him and slipped the phone back into my pocket without looking at it again. Not yet, telling myself whatever it was could wait 90 seconds. A colleague leaned over. 31 years and not one overturned ruling. That has to be some kind of record. "Just lucky," I said, the way I always said it. My daughter kept talking. Something about sacrifice. Something about a father who never explained himself and never needed to. I felt the phone again, a small stone in my pocket, and for the first time all night I wasn't fully in the room. I glanced at my wife's empty seat 2 tables over. She'd left for the charity gala an hour earlier, kissing my cheek, telling me to enjoy every minute of my own party without her. I checked the phone under the table. "Bring the umbrella." My hand started shaking. I'd promised her once, young enough to think a promise like that was romantic instead of terrifying, that I would drop everything the moment those words appeared. No questions, no hesitation. I stood up before my daughter finished her toast. My grandson's face fell. "You're leaving? But the cake—" "I'll be right back," I told him, and I have never told a bigger lie in my life. My grandson watched me walk toward the door with his mouth open slightly, still holding the cake knife. He'd been asking for a month whether I'd really cut the cake with him this time. I'd promised. My daughter had gone quiet mid-sentence. 40 people were now watching a retired judge walk out of his own party at the exact moment his daughter was saying the kindest things she would ever say about him. None of them knew why. I didn't look back. Looking back would have made it harder. I put my napkin down and walked out without explaining anything to anyone. Someone laughed nervously behind me. Someone whispered that I must be feeling sick. I didn't correct them. I didn't know yet whether I'd even be coming back to finish the party at all. In 32 years, I had seen that exact phrase written down exactly twice. Once, on a torn scrap of paper the night we invented it. Once more, in my own handwriting, the night we agreed to burn every copy so no one else would ever find it. Never again after that. Not in a card. Not as a joke. Not once in 3 decades typed by accident. Driving across town, I tried calling her, out of instinct more than sense. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. Calling wasn't part of the promise anyway. I knew that. I put the phone down and made myself stop dialing. I only knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be late. The museum lobby glowed gold and warm. The first person to greet me wasn't my wife. "Your Honor, what an honor." A man in a gray suit shook my hand like we'd known each other for years. "Weller, one of the trustees." He said it like the name should mean something, and in that room it clearly did. A waiter passed with a tray, and Weller called him by name, asked after his daughter's recital. A guard at the door got a warm nod. "Good to see you again, Marcus." An elderly donor squeezed his arm and thanked him again for funding the children's wing at the hospital across town. "This man rebuilt half the pediatric ward with his own money," the donor told me, beaming, "and never let them put his name on a single plaque." Weller waved it off, laughing. "Plaques are for people who need reminding," he said, and the whole group around us laughed with him. He introduced me to 3 more guests over the next few minutes, each time with some warm, specific detail. This is the judge who handled the Ferris estate. Remarkable case. As if he'd studied my career the way you study something you admire. Beautiful woman, your wife, he added at one point. I met her years ago at a gallery opening. Sharp eye. For forgeries, if I recall. I laughed politely. I had no idea yet how much weight that sentence carried. Then his gaze dropped to the small umbrella folded in my jacket pocket. Funny, he said. Some people carry old things long after they stop needing them. I laughed that off, too. He smiled and drifted toward another cluster of guests, and for a moment I genuinely liked him. That was the whole trick of a man like Weller. Nobody double-checks a person the room has already decided to trust. I noticed him again minutes later near the side entrance, standing very still. A man had just walked in. Gray suit, gray tie, nothing that should have drawn attention. But the room reacted before I understood why. A caterer stepped sideways to clear his path without being asked. 2 guards near the coat check straightened and stopped talking mid-sentence. Weller went quiet and small, the way a man does in front of someone he owes something to. I filed it away and kept moving. I found my wife near the east wall, her coat buttoned to her throat. Over her arm, half hidden, was our real umbrella from home, patched twice, on a clear night, inside a building. I took a step toward her. She shook her head. Small, fast, don't come to me. I stopped where I was. She had sent me those 3 words across an entire city. I had left my own party, my grandson's disappointed face, 40 guests who would spend the rest of the night wondering what happened to me. All to reach her. And now that I finally had, she was telling me to stay away. For the first time in 32 years, I wondered if I had misunderstood our own promise. I didn't have time to work it out. I only had a room full of strangers between us. So I watched, the way I used to watch a courtroom before the truth was ready to show itself. The trail went cold fast. A hallway that should have led to her turned up empty. A painting hung slightly. Crooked, the kind of detail this museum would never leave uncorrected. Near a service door, 2 guards cut their conversation short the moment they saw me. I only caught, before the second truck arrives, before they went silent. A guard. I trailed for a few minutes, did nothing more than take a smoke break by the loading entrance. A supply room that should have held cleaning equipment held nothing but a single stepladder. Everything else cleared out recently, like someone had needed the space for something. None of it connected yet. But something in that building was being rearranged piece by piece, while 40 well-dressed strangers admired paintings around me. The young woman with the trembling hands caught my eye once, directly. "Sir," she started, stepping half a pace toward me. Then she stopped herself, glanced past my shoulder, and turned back to her tray like she'd never spoken at all. A waiter passed close to her a moment later and dropped a full tray of glasses, staring at her the whole time like the accident was really about her. She slid a folded napkin off her tray as she bent to help clean the mess, letting it fall near my shoe. I bent down as if adjusting my cuff and palmed it. I was certain in that moment that she was the target and that Weller was behind it. I was wrong on both counts. I quietly warned the head of security. He nodded seriously and walked off. I relaxed, for the first time all night. I even opened the folded napkin in a quiet corner. 4 words in shaking handwriting. "He's not who you think." I assumed she meant Weller. 10 minutes later, her tray sat abandoned by the coats. She was gone. My wife found me, her calm finally cracking. "They took her. Because of you." She pulled me into a side room. "He knows," she said, "about the umbrella. What it means. Us. That's impossible." "The guard you warned," she said. "I placed his face an hour ago. He followed me 30 years back after I flagged a forgery. He overheard us laughing about an umbrella outside a bombed courthouse. He remembered it. For 30 years. I showed her the napkin. He's not who you think. Her face changed. That's not about Weller, she said slowly. I don't think it ever was. We reached the old loading corridor, a leftover of the building's warehouse days, one I recognized from an old property case decades ago. We nearly walked straight into the gray-suited man. We ducked behind a stack of crates just in time. He passed close enough that I could hear him giving orders, low and clipped, and Weller's own men followed them instantly. Crates scraped somewhere deeper in the corridor. My wife stepped out just enough to be seen by a passing guard, smiled and asked him, sweetly, loudly, like a lost gala guest, where the restroom was. He hesitated, annoyed, and walked her back the way she'd come, buying us 30 seconds to slip past. We crawled deeper, past a stairwell I remembered from the old blueprints, one that didn't appear on the museum's modern floor plan at all. Footsteps stopped just outside a doorway ahead of us. Someone reached for the handle. Then the young woman's voice rang out from further down the hall, loud, deliberate, asking a nonsense question about a delivery schedule. It worked. The footsteps moved toward her voice instead of ours. Weller wasn't giving orders tonight. He was taking them. We found her between two guards near the crates. Before we could move, she looked at me. I know who you are. You're the judge who sent my father to prison. I froze. He wasn't innocent, she said quickly. He protected Weller for 20 years. Before he died, he told me who Weller really answered to. Tonight, I finally got a name. She nodded toward the gray-suited man. That's the buyer. Weller's been skimming from his shipments for years. Tonight was supposed to be Weller's punishment. I just got caught in the middle. That's what you almost told me by the coat check, she nodded. I almost told you everything. I lost my nerve. I stepped forward, blocking the corridor. There are cameras in this hallway, and federal officers, walking through that door in 90 seconds. One guard reached toward his jacket. Nobody moved. Then my investigator came through the door behind them with officers at her back. My wife pulled the girl free while their eyes stayed on me. Near the loading dock, the officers found Weller already in handcuffs, delivered there by the very men who'd come to punish him. He looked at me and smiled anyway. 30 years too late, Judge. I understood it a week later. 3 sculptures had already left through a different exit while everyone watched 2 frightened women. The people had been the distraction. Word moved through the gallery fast. A young officer near the coats stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. That's him? I thought he retired years ago. An older detective standing nearby shook his head, almost laughing. My father used to talk about him at the dinner table. Said organized crime stopped requesting different judges after his 3rd year on the bench. Why? The young officer asked. Because once his name showed up on a docket, the detective said, they knew the trial was already over. A nickname moved. Through the whispers after that, one I hadn't heard aloud in a decade, the last judge you ever wanted. Not because I was cruel. Because no one ever walked out of my courtroom having escaped what they'd done. My grandchildren only ever called me Grandpa. I never needed anyone to know. That was never the point. Before we left, the young woman found my wife by the coat check. She didn't speak. She simply held out the umbrella and placed it back into my wife's hands. Later, in the coat room, I asked the question I'd carried since she shook her head at me. Why did you tell me to stay away? Because when I sent that message, I didn't know if I'd survive the night. I wanted you close enough to come, and far enough that if something happened, it wouldn't happen in front of you. I didn't send it because I thought you'd save me, she said. I sent it because I knew you would come, even if you couldn't. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. So I just held her. Driving home, the sky turned pale gray before sunrise. Neither of us spoke for a long while. She held the umbrella in her lap, her thumb tracing one of the old patches. After 20 minutes of silence, she said, "You left your own party." "I know," I said. "He's going to remember that forever, you know. Your grandson." "I know that too." She reached over and took my hand on the console without looking at me, and let it rest there the rest of the way. That was the whole of it. That was everything. We pulled into the driveway as the porch light clicked on by itself. She set the umbrella by the door, mud still caked around its tip. I reached to clean it off. She caught my hand. "Leave it." "Why?" "One day our grandchildren will ask why that old umbrella is patched twice and never thrown away." "And what will we tell them?" She smiled, watching the first real light of morning reach the porch steps. "That it saved our marriage twice." I looked at her. "The umbrella was never the promise," she said. "We were," I said.